My name is Quinn, and I am a bookseller here at the Reading Room CLE. This is our proprietress, Cha-Cha. We are running a little bit late today because I was putting the finishing touches on her new Elsa dress, which I made for her, to accompany part 3 of Hans Christian Andersen's The Snow Queen, which is what I will read for you and for her tonight. Part 3 is called The Garden of the Old Woman Who Could Do Magic. What happened to Gerda when Kay didn't come back? No one knew what had happened to him. No one could give any news of him. The boys simply described how they had seen him tie his toboggan to a fine great sledge, which drove down the street and out by the town gate. Nobody knew where he was. There was great grief, and Gerda cried her heart out, for people said that he was dead, that he had fallen into the river that ran close to the town. What a long, gloomy winter it was. And then the spring arrived, with warmer sunshine. Kay's dead and gone, said Gerda. I don't believe it, said the sunshine. He's dead and gone, she said to the swallows. I don't believe it, was the answer, and in the end, Gerda didn't believe it either. I'll put on my new red shoes, she said one morning, the ones Kay has never seen, and then I'll go down to the river and question it. It was early morning when she kissed her sleeping granny, put on the red shoes, and walked all by herself out of the town gate down to the river. Is it true that you've taken my friend? I'll give you my red shoes if you'll give him back to me. The waves seemed to nod back to her curiously, so she took off her red shoes, the dearest possession she had, and threw them both out into the river, but they fell close into the bank, and the waves brought them straight back to her. It was as though the river didn't like to rob her of her dearest possession, because it hadn't taken Kay. But Gerda felt that perhaps she hadn't thrown the shoes far enough out, so she climbed into a boat that lay among the rushes and went right along to the far end of it and threw the shoes overboard. But the boat had not been made fast, and at the movement she gave it, it drifted from the bank. She noticed this and made haste to escape, but before she could get back, the boat was a couple of yards from the shore and gathered speed as it glided away. At this, Gerda grew very frightened and began to cry, but nobody heard her except the sparrows, and they couldn't carry her ashore. Instead, they flew along the bank, as if to comfort her with their chirping, "Here we are, here we are." The boat drifted with the stream, while Gerda sat quite still in her stocking feet. Her red shoes were floating behind, but they couldn't catch the boat, for it had a head start on them. It was very pretty on both banks, old trees, lovely flowers, and grassy slopes with sheep and cows, but not a person in sight. Perhaps the river will carry me to Kay, thought Gerda, and that raised her spirits. She stood up and gazed for hours at the delightful green banks. Eventually she came to a large cherry orchard where there was a little house with curious red and blue windows, and a thatched roof and 2 wooden soldiers outside, presenting arms to all who sailed past. Gerda called out to them, thinking they were alive, but of course they didn't answer. She came quite close to them as the river drove the boat straight into the bank. Gerda called out still louder, and that brought out of the house an old woman leaning on a crutch-handled stick. She was wearing a large sun hat, which was painted over with most beautiful flowers. "You poor child," said the old woman. "However did you come to be drifting on this great rolling river, far out into the wide world?" Then the old woman went right into the water, and hooking the boat with her stick, drew it into the bank and lifted Gerda out. Gerda was glad to be on dry land again, though she was a little frightened of the strange old woman. "Now, come and tell me who you are and how you come to be here," she said. Then Gerda told her everything, and the old woman shook her head and said, "Dear me!" And when Gerda had finished her story and asked if she had seen Kay, the woman said that he hadn't come past there, but he might though, and Gerda mustn't be downhearted, but taste some of her cherries and have a look at her flowers, which were prettier than any picture book, and could each of them tell a complete story. Then she took Gerda by the hand, and they went inside the little house, and the old woman shut the door behind her. The windows were high up on the walls with red, blue, and yellow glass in them. The daylight shone strangely into the room with all these colors, but on the table was a plate of the finest cherries, and Gerda was allowed to eat as many of them as she liked. While she was eating, the old woman combed her hair with a gold comb, and her bright yellow curls made a charming frame for the kind face which was so round and rosy. "I've always longed for a nice little girl like you," said the woman. "Just you see how well we shall get along together, you and I." And as she combed Gerda's hair, Gerda forgot Kay more and more. You see, the old woman could do magic, but she wasn't a wicked magician. She only did a little magic for her own enjoyment, and at present she very much wanted to keep Gerda. So she went out into the garden, reached out her stick to all the rose trees, and, however beautifully they were in bloom, they all sank down into the black earth, leaving no sign of where they had stood. The old woman was afraid that if Gerda saw the roses, she might remember Kay and run off. Now she took Gerda out into the flower garden. What fragrance and beauty there was! Every flower you could think of, at whatever season of the year, stood there in full bloom. No picture book could be more gay and attractive. Gerda jumped for joy and played about until the sun went down behind the tall cherry trees. Then she was given a charming bed with red silk pillows that were stuffed with blue violets, and there she slept and dreamed as wonderfully as any queen on her wedding day. The next morning she was again able to play with the flowers in the sunshine, and in this way a number of days went by. Gerda knew every flower, but however many there were, she somehow felt there was one missing, though she didn't know which. And then one day she was sitting, looking at the old woman's sun hat with the flowers painted on it, and sure enough, the prettiest of them all was a rose. The woman had forgotten to remove it from her hat when she made the other roses sink down into the ground. That comes of not having your wits about you. "What?" said Gerda. "No roses in the garden." And she ran in and out of the flower beds and looked, but there wasn't a rose to be found. Then she sat down and cried. Her hot tears fell just where a rose tree had sunk, and as their warmth watered the ground, the tree suddenly sprouted up, just as blooming as when it sank, and Gerda embraced it and kissed the roses while her thoughts turned to the lovely roses at home, and so to Kay. "Oh, how I've been delayed," said the girl. "I was to go and find Kay. Do you know where he is?" she asked the roses. "Do you think he's dead and gone?" "No, he's not dead," said the roses. "We've been in the earth ourselves. That's where all the dead are, but Kay isn't there." "Thank you," said Gerda, and she went off to the other flowers and looked into their cups and said, "Do you know where Kay is?" But every flower was standing in the sun and dreaming its own fairy tale or romance. Gerda was told ever so many of those, but nobody knew anything about Kay. What does the convolvulus say? "Overhanging the narrow mountain road stands an ancient castle. Creepers grow thick about the old red walls, climbing leaf by leaf right over the balcony, and there stands a graceful girl leaning over the parapet and looking down to the road. No rose hangs fresher on its spray. No apple blossom that is borne by the breeze from its trees hovers more lightly. Listen to the whispers of her splendid silk dress. Is he never coming?" "Is it Kay, you mean?" asked Gerda. "I only speak of my own story, my own dream," answered the convolvulus. What does the little snowdrop say? Between the trees is a long board, you'll like this one, Cha-Cha, hanging by 2 ropes. It's a swing. 2 pretty little girls in snowy white frocks with long green ribbons of silk fluttering from their hats are sitting and swinging. Their brother, who is bigger than they are, is standing up in the swing with his arm round a rope to steady himself. In one hand he has a little bowl, and in the other a clay pipe. He's blowing soap bubbles. To and fro goes the swing, and the bubbles rise, floating in the air with beautiful changing colors. The last one still clings to the pipe, swaying in the wind. The swing rocks on. The little black dog, as lightly as the bubbles, rises on his hind legs, asking to be taken into the swing. It swoops past, and the dog tumbles and yelps angrily. The bubbles burst. A swinging board, a picture of leaping froth. That is my song. I dare say that's a pretty tale, but you tell it so mournfully, and you don't say anything about Kay. What do the hyacinths say? There were 3 beautiful sisters with delicate skin as clear as crystal. One's dress was red, another's blue, and the third one's pure white. Hand in hand they danced beside the calm lake in the silver moonlight. They were not elf maidens, but humans. The air smelled so sweet, and the girls vanished into the wood. The air smelled still sweeter. 3 coffins in which lay the beautiful sisters glided from the heart of the wood away over the lake. Fireflies gleaming around like little hovering tapers. Are the dancing maidens asleep, or are they dead? The scent of the flowers tells that they are dead. The evening bell is tolling for the dead. You make me quite sad, said Gerda. Your scent is so strong, I can't get the dead sisters out of my mind. Oh, but is Kay really dead? The roses have been down in the earth, and they say no. Ding dong, told the bells of the hyacinth. We're not tolling for Kay. We don't know him. We're merely singing our song, the only one we know. And Gerda went along to the buttercup, shining out among its glistening green leaves. How brightly you shine, little sun. Tell me whether you know where I shall find my friend. The buttercup shone most beautifully and looked at Gerda once more. What song do you suppose the buttercup could sing? It wasn't about Kay either. In a small backyard, the sun was shining warmly on its first day of spring, its beams gliding down the neighbors' white walls. Nearby grew the first yellow flowers. You okay? Is that too much ice cream? Glittering like gold in the first warm rays of the sun. Old Granny was out in her chair. Her good-looking granddaughter, a humble maidservant, had come home on a short visit, and now she kissed her grandmother. There was gold from the heart in that blessed kiss. Golden lips, golden power, golden hearts in that morning hour. There, that's my little story, said the buttercup. My poor old granny, sighed Gerda. She's sure to be longing for me and grieving for me as she was for Kay. But I shall soon be home again, and then I shall bring Kay with me. It's no good my asking the flowers. They only know their own songs. They can tell me nothing. And she tucked up her frock so as to be able to run faster. The gate was locked, but she waggled the rusty latch till it was free. The gate flew open, and Gerda ran out barefooted into the wide world. 3 times she looked back, but nobody was following her. At last she couldn't run any more, but sat down on a big stone, and when she glanced about her, she saw that the summer was over. It was late autumn, but there had been no sign of this in the beautiful garden, where there was always sunshine with flowers belonging to every season of the year. My, how I've dawdled, said Gerda. Why, it's autumn already. I mustn't rest any longer. And she got up to go. Oh, how tired and sore her feet were. The countryside looked cold and damp. The long willow leaves were quite yellow, shedding misty tears as the leaves dropped one by one. Only the sloe was still bearing fruit, so sharp as to twist your mouth all crooked. Oh, how gloomy and sad the wide world seemed. Part 4 is Prince and Princess, and I believe we will read that one tomorrow. In the meantime, keep reading.